You have asked yourself the question, not once, many times, late at night, exhausted from another draining interaction, another relationship that cost more than it gave, another person who seemed to find you and then take from you in a way you didn't see coming until it was already too late. Why me? Why does this keep happening? Why do I always seem to attract this particular kind of person? You have tried to fix it from the outside. You learned to spot the warning signs faster. You built distance. You decided to be less trusting, less open, less available. And for a while that felt like progress. But then it happened again. A different face, a different name, the same dynamic. And the question came back with more force than before, because now it carried something darker underneath it. Not just confusion, something closer to shame, a suspicion you won't say out loud, that maybe there is something about you that invites this, that the problem is not bad luck, that the problem might be you. I want to stop here before we go any further, because I spent years inside that exact question. I used to believe I was simply a bad judge of character, that I kept missing the signs that everyone else could apparently see. What I eventually understood was that it wasn't my judgment failing. It was that I was carrying something I hadn't examined, an old wound I didn't know was visible, and certain people could feel it before I had said a word. Not because they were calculating, because they were hungry, and I was broadcasting something I didn't know I was sending. Carl Jung spent his life mapping what the human psyche does with its pain when we refuse to look at it directly. And what he found is the most useful thing anyone has ever told me about this pattern. He found that the pain doesn't disappear when we ignore it. It finds another way out. Think of a stone. A smooth stone has no purchase. Nothing can grip it, cling to it, or find a way in. But a stone with a crack is different. The crack doesn't announce itself. The stone doesn't look broken. But the crack is where pressure concentrates, where the cold gets in and widens the gap over time. The predator doesn't create your crack. They find it. And what they find in you, they found because it was already there, waiting, leaking, broadcasting. That is what this is actually about. And the reason no one has been able to help you fix it by teaching you to spot toxic people faster is that you have been trying to solve an external problem that is being generated from the inside. There is a specific reason why you, intelligent, capable, perceptive as you are, keep ending up in the same dynamic, and it is not what you think. Most people, when they hear that they might be contributing to the pattern, hear blame. That is not what this is. Blame would be useless and also wrong. But empowerment, the recognition that something you are doing or not doing is generating the signal, that is the most useful thing available to you. Because if you are generating the signal, you can change it. You cannot change other people. You can only change what you are putting out. Jung's central discovery about the human psyche was this: the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge do not simply disappear, they accumulate. He called this the shadow. Not a poetic metaphor, but a precise psychological description of an actual process. Everything you have judged as unacceptable about yourself, the anger you decided was too much, the neediness you learned to be ashamed of, the fear you decided made you weak, gets pushed down, out of conscious awareness, into the dark. But here is the crucial part. Out of conscious awareness does not mean out of operation. Your shadow is active right now. It is shaping how you hold your body when you feel threatened. It is in the half-second hesitation before you speak. It is in the way you laugh slightly too quickly at things that aren't funny because you are terrified of being seen as difficult. It is in the way you apologize before you've done anything wrong. Your unacknowledged pain does not stay silent. It broadcasts. Emotionally predatory people do not consciously decode these signals. They feel them. They have a finely tuned instinct for a specific kind of vulnerability. Not weakness in the conventional sense, but the vulnerability of someone who is not fully at home in themselves. Someone whose edges are uncertain. Someone who flinches in particular places and rushes to smooth things over in particular moments. They move toward that signal not because they are evil. Most of them don't understand what they're doing, but because they are hungry for exactly what the signal promises. Someone who will react. Someone whose emotional energy can be accessed. Someone with a crack. The question is not why toxic people keep finding you. The question is why you keep being findable. But understanding that you are broadcasting the signal is only the first level, because there is a second mechanism operating underneath it. One that explains not just why these people find you, but why you keep choosing them back. And that mechanism is one of the most confronting things Jung ever described. You have probably noticed that the person who drains you is not always someone you were forced to be around. Often it is someone you chose, someone you were drawn to, perhaps even fascinated by, before the dynamic became clear. And that pull, that specific fascination is not random. It is information. Jung called this projection, one of the most important and most misunderstood concepts in all of psychology. Projection is not simply accusing someone of something. It is the unconscious act of placing a part of yourself, a part you cannot accept, onto another person, and then reacting to it as if it only exists in them. Think of the person in your life who irritates you most deeply, not mildly annoys, genuinely gets under your skin in a way that feels disproportionate, that you cannot fully explain even to yourself. Hold them in your mind. Now ask a harder question. Where does a version of that quality, even a small repressed version, exist in you? Perhaps you cannot stand their neediness, their constant requirement for reassurance, their inability to be alone. And perhaps, if you are honest, there is a part of you that is also desperate to be reassured, that also cannot stand to be unseen, that you have spent enormous energy keeping under control because you were taught that needing things was shameful. And so now, whenever you see that quality displayed openly in another person, it enrages you, not simply because of what they are doing, because of what they are reminding you of. What repels you most in others is often the clearest map to what you have buried in yourself. This is why cutting off the toxic person, while sometimes necessary, is never enough on its own. If the projection remains, the screen simply changes. You leave a manipulative friend and find a manipulative partner. You escape a controlling boss and walk into a controlling family dynamic. The specific person is not the source of the pattern. You are carrying the source of the pattern inside you. And the psyche, in what Jung called the repetition compulsion, keeps recreating the familiar wound, not to punish you, but because it is trying to get your attention. Every recurrence is an invitation to finally look at what you have been looking away from. But here is where the confrontation deepens. Because it is not just that you project onto others, it is that you are drawn to people who will activate the projection most powerfully. And that activation tells you something about yourself you could not have learned any other way, if you are willing to stop reacting long enough to read it. You are not a passive victim of this pattern. That is the hardest thing to hear. and it is also the most freeing. The reason toxic dynamics persist is not only that you attract people who drain you, it is that you have needs running in the background, unacknowledged, unmet, operating beneath the level of your conscious awareness, that these people know exactly how to exploit. Not because they have studied you, because they have been finding those needs in people their whole lives. They are specialists, and you, without knowing it, have been advertising. Consider the need for approval. For most people who find themselves repeatedly targeted, this is the central wound, the place where the crack is widest. It was installed early, in childhood, when approval from the people who raised you was not just emotionally desirable, but functionally necessary. When their withdrawal felt like a threat to your survival. That is not a flaw. That is how attachment works. But as an adult, carrying that same level of sensitivity to approval without examining it means you are operating with a child's alarm system in an adult world. A toxic person, even one who could not articulate what they are doing, feels this instantly. They know that all they have to do is threaten to withdraw their warmth, to go cold, to offer a look of disappointment, and you will move. You will apologize for things you didn't do. You will explain yourself when you owe no explanation. You will shrink to fit the space they are allowing you. Not because you are weak, because the alarm is firing, and the alarm is old, and you have never questioned whether it is still accurate. The need you haven't named is the lever anyone can pull. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, the ideas that don't get softened, the ones that actually ask something of you, subscribe to Wise Daily. That's what we're here for. The people who keep finding you are not finding you by accident. They are finding the unmet need you keep leaving in the open. And the first step towards sealing it is not learning to hide it better. It is learning to meet it yourself. That shift from hiding the need to meeting it is where the real work begins. And it is darker and more demanding than anything you have tried so far. Because it requires you to go somewhere you have been avoiding for a very long time. Most people, when they understand that their unexamined shadow is broadcasting a signal, respond by trying to broadcast less. They go quiet, more guarded. They try to project an air of having no needs, no cracks, no vulnerabilities. This is not integration. It is performance, and it fails because the shadow does not respond to the performance. It only deepens. What Jung proposed, what he called shadow integration, is not the suppression of the dark parts. It is the opposite. It is the deliberate, courageous act of turning towards them, not to eliminate them, not to fix them, to understand them, to ask what they have been trying to protect you from, to listen to what the anger is guarding, to hear what the fear has been trying to tell you. Because those parts of you that you have pushed into the dark are not simply problems. They contain something you need. The anger you have been keeping locked away. It contains the energy required to set a boundary without apologizing for it. The neediness you have been ashamed of. It contains the knowledge of what genuine intimacy actually feels like, which is why you can recognize its absence so precisely even when you can't name it. The fear you have been running from. It contains real information about what is and is not safe. If you can learn to hear it clearly, instead of letting it run silently in the background, distorting everything. For decades you have been spending an enormous amount of psychological energy holding these parts down. That expenditure is what makes you tired. It is what makes you vulnerable. Because when most of your energy is going into internal management, you have very little left for clear-eyed observation of what is happening around you. You see what you need to see. You miss what you're afraid to see. The exhaustion you carry is not from the people who drain you. It is from the effort of keeping yourself from yourself. Shadow work, the actual practice of turning toward what you have buried, is not comfortable. It will ask you to feel things you decided were too much to feel, to admit things about yourself you have been carefully not admitting. But on the other side of that discomfort is something that cannot be faked and cannot be taken from you. The experience of being whole enough that there is no longer a crack available for someone else to find. Think about what it would feel like to walk into a room, any room, with any kind of person in it, and feel nothing that needed managing. No low-level scan for who might be a problem. No quiet calculation of how to present yourself so that the wrong kind of person doesn't notice you. No background alertness that you've had so long you stopped knowing it was there. Just presence, just yourself, in a room, with nothing to broadcast and nothing to hide. That is not a fantasy. It is what becomes available, gradually, imperfectly, but genuinely, when a person has done the work of knowing their own crack. When you have genuinely sat with the parts of yourself you were most afraid of, when you have withdrawn the projections you were most invested in, and met the needs you were most ashamed to acknowledge, something changes that no strategy or tactic could produce. You become, in the most precise sense, unreadable to a certain kind of person. Not because you have built walls, not because you have become cold or closed, but because the signal has stopped, the crack has sealed, not through suppression, but through the very different act of self-knowledge. And a stone with no crack offers no purchase. The predator moves past you without interest, the way a hand slides off smooth stone without finding anywhere to hold. Wholeness is not armor. It is the absence of the opening that needed armor in the first place. This is what psychological health actually looks like from the outside. Not guarded, not performatively strong, simply settled. There is a quality in people who have done genuine inner work that is immediately recognizable and almost impossible to manufacture. A kind of groundedness that has nothing to prove and therefore nothing to protect. Jung observed this in the people he worked with, who had gone furthest in individuation. The process of becoming genuinely and completely themselves. They did not repel difficult people through aggression or distance. They repelled them through wholeness, through the quiet authority of someone who has already looked at their own darkness and is no longer afraid of it. You will lose people in this process. When you stop sending the signal, the people who came for the signal will leave. Let them leave without apology. What leaves was never a relationship. It was a transaction, a dynamic that depended on your wound remaining unexamined. And what grows in its place over time, through the slow rebuilding of a life oriented around genuine selfhood rather than the constant management of other people's access to you, is something you may not yet have experienced fully. The specific quiet satisfaction of being known by people who are there because of who you actually are. Not what you provide, not the role you fill. You. That is the destination. It is not fast, it is not painless, but it is available, and it begins with a single question, asked honestly for the first time. Where is my crack, and have I ever really looked at it? You were not unlucky. You were not broken. You were not cursed with some inexplicable magnetism for the wrong people. You were carrying something unexamined, a crack you didn't know was visible, leaking a signal you didn't know you were sending. And certain people, hungry for exactly what that signal promised, found their way to it every time. The work is not to become harder to find. It is to become whole enough that when they arrive there is nothing there for them. You were never a magnet for the wrong people. You were a window, and they could see through you because you hadn't yet looked through yourself. If that landed, type, "I find my own crack," in the comments. Not for me, for you. As the beginning of a different kind of looking. And if this video gave you something real, please like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Wise Daily. Every video on this channel is built to give you one thing: the philosophical tools to live with more power, more clarity, and more intention. We'll see you in the next one. Jung showed us where the signal comes from: the unexamined shadow, the unacknowledged wound, the crack that broadcasts before you speak. But there is a philosopher who asked what it takes, in daily practice, to actually govern the inner life that generates it. Not once, in a moment of insight, but consistently, under pressure, when the alarm is firing and the old patterns are pulling. That philosopher is Marcus Aurelius, and what he wrote in the meditations about the discipline of keeping your own interior life closed to what has no right to enter it is the subject of our next video.